Welcome, everyone. I'm Christina Bain, and I am at Babson College here where we're conducting our global webinar today. I want to thank all of you for joining this morning or afternoon or evening to our conversation. We're going to be having a wonderful discussion today with a variety of experts on a topic that's a bit more nuanced than what you hear in the anti-trafficking language and discourse today. The title of our talk today is "It's Not the Winning that Counts, It's How You Play the Game, Criminal Infiltration into Global Sports." And we're going to be talking about a variety of issues surrounding human trafficking, the private sector, and the global sporting world at large. This series of online conferences, this is our fourth in our series with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Initiative on Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery at Babson College. And I want to thank our generous sponsors, McKenna, Long, and Aldrich. McKenna, Long, and Aldrich has been on the front lines of helping fight human trafficking. They're doing tremendous pro bono work on this issue, and if you're interested in learning more about their work, please go to their website, www.mckennalong.com. And again, we want to thank them for their generous sponsorship of this webinar series. And now I want to tell you a bit about our initiative that we have here at Babson College, the Initiative on Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery. This webinar series is part of our initiative and part of our mission of bringing together entrepreneurial minds, students and business leaders, corporate, NGO, and governmental partners, and human trafficking and modern slavery activists across the globe in order to learn, network, and build innovative approaches to advancing human freedom. We're also using our resources and our expertise from the college, including faculty and research, classroom approaches, and action-oriented initiatives to educate and activate current and next-generation business leaders in the fight against human trafficking and modern slavery. We hope that every student who comes through Babson College and every person who attends a lecture or an event leaves with the knowledge of anti-trafficking and fighting modern-day slavery. And I also want to thank the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center at George Mason University, who is also supporting our webinars and our series this year. We're so thankful for their support, and Dr. Louise Shelley for her tremendous efforts in doing the work that she does every day on the front lines in fighting human trafficking and transnational organized crime. And now I want to introduce my colleague Livia Wagner from the Global Initiative, who's going to be telling us more about what they're working on at the Global Initiative. Livia?
Yes. Hello. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you, Christina, for this introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Livia Wagner, and I'm the private secretary of the Global Initiative, and I'm going to explain what the Global Initiative is. Starting with the Global Initiative is a network of experts from different backgrounds, meaning coming from law enforcement, government, development organizations, and so on, seeking new and innovative responses to tackle organized crime. And the Global Initiative was conceived after a series of closed forum discussions with many experts from all these different institutions and organizations back in 2011 and 2012. Because there was a need for a network of experts to be able to develop a more strategic approach to counter organized crime. And the participants concluded that organized crime and also human trafficking, and today we're touching the issue of trafficking, is not, or very often not, systematically integrated in national action plans, and that there is also a lack of multilateral cooperation, which, and therefore there is a need for a proactive global approach. And therefore a network of experts allows a critical debate and also can serve as an incubator for innovative strategies. The launch of the Global Initiative was already 2 years ago, back in 2013. At least it was formally launched in 2013. And now we have more than 100 experts, independent experts from all over the world, from all the different areas. And we're based in Geneva, and our three main priority forms of crimes are environmental crime, cybercrime, and organized crime, where human trafficking falls under. And very often, where we have realized that stakeholders are struggling to counter human trafficking, and that's why there is this urgency for developing collaborative approaches. And so far, the Global Initiative did a research report on smuggling of migrants from Africa to Europe. It's about the main smuggling routes to Europe, which is also available on our GI website, of course. We also did a special brief for the IGAD, which is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development on Human Trafficking. And we're also now preparing another project, which is going to be a study on human trafficking and organized crime in Latin America, especially in the area of illegal mining. And in general, the Global Initiative aims to include all the stakeholders, and also especially the private sector. We feel that it's very important to broaden the debate on human trafficking and to fight human trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Livia. Thank you for your tremendous work around the world in fighting this issue, and also your work in research and convening. It's wonderful to have you as a partner on these webinars. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our moderator for today's discussion, Dr. James Essen, who is a lecturer in human geography at Loughborough University in the UK, and he's doing some extremely interesting work looking at the migration of West African youth to Europe in terms of the football industry. And he was educated at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne and the University of Oxford. He was also awarded his PhD in human geography at University College London. And he is going to frame our conversation for us today and introduce our other speakers. Thank you, Dr. Essen, for joining us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Fantastic. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Babson College for inviting me to take part in the seminar, which I'm sure we're all going to have a very thought-provoking and very interesting one morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Now, as Christina mentioned, I want to just briefly say a few words before we begin the seminar to try to kind of set the scene, as it were. Now, I don't want to talk too long because I know many of you are here to listen to, our three excellent speakers that we have, and also to have some very interesting discussion in the Q&A. But I thought I just wanted to spend a few moments trying to just say why I wanted to be part of this seminar and what I hope we're going to get from it. So as Christina mentioned, for the last several years I've been doing some research on what I call the irregular migration of West African youth within the football industry. So what do I mean by irregular migration? Several years ago I read an article in the newspaper, a famous newspaper, which mentioned that young West African boys were being trafficked to Europe via the football industry. Now, for me, this was quite a remarkable thing to read because very often you don't put sport and trafficking together. Now, in short, what the article argued was that people pretending to be agents, proposing that they were agents, were going to West African countries and saying to young men and boys, if you give me, for example, 3,000 euros, I'll be able to get you a trial at Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain, you can name the famous team of your choice. When the child or the person arrived in Europe, there was no trial and they were stranded in a destination country. Now, what I find fascinating about this work is that it forces us to look away from what's become a very morally fixed terrain in terms of sex-related trafficking. And that, in many ways, forces us to rethink some of the narrative understandings that we have around the idea of what it means to be trafficked. Now, in addition to this work on what people call trafficking through football, which is what I've just described, there's also a case of what's known as trafficking in football, okay, what some people call a form of modern-day slavery. So this is where, for example, again, a young boy, typically from Western Africa, comes to Europe to play for a club and they sign a contract that's of an exploitative nature, okay, which is known as trafficking in football. So the youth leaves a West African country, comes to Europe, he signs terms that are exploitative, okay? Now, what I find interesting about these two processes, the trafficking in football and what people call trafficking through football, is that they force us to think about the ways in which sports and criminal infiltration can take place within and through sport, okay? Now, as part of today's discussion and talk, we've got some very, very, very interesting speakers from a variety of sectors. Now, why I wanted to be involved in this seminar today is because I think very often we don't have enough discussion across sectors, okay? Now, in order to understand trafficking within football, we will, of course, need to work with organizations that deal within the football industry itself. But also understand trafficking through football, for example, we need to work with other organizations and NGOs and other private sector organizations. Why is that? Because if we think about the case of trafficking through football, for example, we need to try and understand how it is that a complete stranger can say to somebody, please hand over 3,000 or 4,000 euros and I'll give you a trial for a club, and somebody will say yes and hand over that money. We need to try and understand how that can happen and take place. In order to do so, we need to work with the football industry and also organizations beyond it. Now, as part of the discussion today, we're going to hopefully have a very, very interesting dialogue and lots of interesting questions. But for me, one of the key reasons why seminars like this need to take place is because, as I mentioned before, we're bringing people together from different sectors and organizations who don't often get the chance to come together and have dialogue together. And hopefully by doing so, we're going to do more than just talk. We're going to try and find ways to move debates forward and also think of ways in real practical terms to solve some issues that we're dealing with and try to understand how it is that criminal infiltration can take place in sports, which is not a domain that is normally associated with criminal activities. And more importantly, I'm hoping that we're going to try and look at criminal infiltration in a more nuanced and varied way. So for example, say we're going to be looking at human trafficking through sports. We're going to be looking at labor exploitation within the sports apparel industry. We may talk about sex workers associated with major sporting events. And again, we're trying to look at a more dynamic and a more varied understanding of how criminal infiltration can take place within sporting context. So on that note, I'd like to pass this on to our first speaker, who is Jean-Claude Envermin, who is the founder of an organization called Foot Solidaire. Now, I know Jean-Claude personally. I have worked with him in the past, and he's doing some fantastic work with youth who have been trafficked through the football industry. Jean-Claude is a former professional footballer, and unfortunately, due to a very serious injury, he had to retire in the late 1990s. But he's then gone on to set up Foot Solidaire, which is a fantastic organization that works with leading institutions and state bodies around the world, such as the Council of Europe, FIFA, and European professional leagues. So I will now hand you over to Jean-Claude Envermin, who will now be our first speaker. Thank you.
Jean-Claude, make sure you unmute yourself for us. Yes, it's on. Jean-Claude, can you hear us? I need you to unmute your phone. There we go.
Hello. You can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Essen. To introduce me, I would like first of all to thank the Babson College and the Global Initiative to invite Foot Solidaire to address the panelists of this very important conference on human trafficking linked with professional sport. First, as Dr. Essen said, I was born in Cameroon, former player and founder of Foot Solidaire organization in 2000. I would like just to talk about the work of Foot Solidaire and to explain how I founded Foot Solidaire in 2000 and why we founded Foot Solidaire and the main goal of Foot Solidaire. With the topic, it's not the winning that counts, it's how you play the game, criminal infiltration into global sport. Foot Solidaire will talk about its experience since 2000, our mission, why Food Solidaire, why is there a problem, how we combat the trafficking, and Food Solidaire and the private sector. And then I will talk about our next steps. First of all, Food Solidaire, the mission is to protect the young footballer aspiring for a professional career. Mainly, we have worked with young African players because of this issue of trafficking. And Dr. Esson talked about trafficking within football by football people or football body, clubs, agents, and trafficking through football by the people, I can say they are criminals, using football to make money. So today, Food Solidaire is based in Switzerland and in Paris. The context is this increasing migration of young African players to Europe and Asia, because today the young Africans, they are moving all around the world, and some of them are moving to the US, to Canada, to Latin America to find a best career, a best training, the best training condition. And we have the problem with the recruitment process by clubs and scouts. For example, in Africa, the condition of their stay during their trials at football clubs and academy. In Europe, the problem of the working permit, they have a very short visa. Their schooling, coaching, and development is not, we cannot say is the best thing for these young players, because sometimes when they leave Africa, they arrive in Europe, they are not educated. And then the children trafficking by the people working with the organized crime. All points in all regards to an abuse under international law and social norms that equate to trafficking. So today, a fight against trafficking of young footballers is growing because of the work of Food Solidaire since 2000. We work with the European Parliament, and the UEFA recent decision to prohibit third-party ownership means trafficking is a high priority in Europe. And this conference, this online conference, shows the trafficking is it's a serious issue at very high level. And the Council of Europe in 2009 and 2013 Conference for Protection of Children. So, why is there a problem? We know the success of African players in Europe, in Africa. Every children want to do the same, like Didier Drogba, Samuel Eto'o, the most famous African players. The economic outlook for young Africans, because you know, is not very easy in Africa. The context is not very. You know, all the family want to become rich. The unscrupulous and non-licensed FIFA agents, fake agents, the kickback, they want to make money very easily with the family. As Dr. Esson said 1 minute ago, they used to ask money, sometimes 2,000 euro, 5,000 euro. The most we say I have seen was 10,000 euro. And today there is a new threat because of the new FIFA regulation on working with intermediaries. From the 1st April 2005, they will suppress the agent license. So anybody can recruit and transfer players since from the 1st of April this year. The short duration working visa, or not visa at all, because the young player travel without visa, sometimes with a false passport. They pay the people. They arrive in Europe with sometimes with 1 week visa, 2 weeks with visa, and there is not enough to get a contract. No enforceable framework governing good practice. Today, in the world of football, you don't have regulation, a framework, how you can scout, recruit, and host the young players. The lack of cooperation between the football associations and the government in Europe, for example, is a big problem, because the FA said is not their concern, the trafficking of young players, because it's out of the football association. And there is no fallback net for failed trials. When the young players fail their trials, they stay sometime in Europe, because that was a very big investment for the family. So they don't want to go back because of the pride, dishonor, and they stay illegally in Europe. In Africa, we have about 20 affected countries, and we have some information in Latin America about 10 countries. How Futsalidae combat trafficking? Our strategy, we have first to identify and speak out against the exploitation. We have today more than 1,700 cases since 2006, only in France. And Futsalidae is not a very big organization. We don't have means, and is a very, very important lot of cases just only in France. We have to spread the message. Now we have some ambassadors, former players, and join hands. It's very important. Join hands with footballing bodies, institutions, government, corporate to protect the youth. But we can say that it's not very easy because of the footballing bodies, the cooperation we did with the footballing body was not very successful by now because of some said the trafficking is not in football, but is just by criminals. So it's not the football world concern. We are educating actors at both ends of the spectrum. In Africa, in Europe, we try to train the coach. We try to give information about how the criminals operate. With our Futsalidae Charter for the protection of young players, we want to establish good practice for the recruitment, first the scouting, the recruitment, and the hosting of young players, because today anybody can recruit with out of the legal framework. We did a lot of conferences, several conferences and workshops since 2006 with the European Parliament, as I said, the government, the African Union. Last year we organized, we host with the IOM, the Permanent Mission of Italy in Geneva, the African Union, and other organizations. We host a conference at the United Nations in Geneva. We did a lot of work with the FIFA, the EPFL, the European Professional Football Leagues in Switzerland, and I attend a lot of working group at the United Nations Office on Sport for Development and Peace. So we did a lot of workshop, conference with clubs and players' unions, mainly in France. We are helping and supporting young African footballers in Europe. Every year we have about 130 cases, and we help some African youth team to come in Europe for a European football experience tournament to see how it's difficult to be professional, to experience the reality of the professional football. We have launched some educational programs at youth tournament. For example, in Egypt, we at the FIFA World Cup in 2009. In France, at a tournament, Mondial de Montaigu, the name of the tournament, in 2012, 13, and this year. Work with African academies, training coach on how to protect the young players. And we publish informational tools, booklets like Futsalidae Passport, which give advice on the professional career, how to manage with the agents, and other advice to avoid the trap of the international recruitment. So, Food Solidaire and the private sector, what I can say for us is the big issue, because we have to find the appropriate strategy and message to attract the private sector, the corporates, because, you know, fight against children in sport, football is not a very, very, as I said, sexy issue, because many of the corporates, they are sponsoring football clubs, and competition is not very easy to join and to link the protection, the fight against the children trafficking and their brands. But I think we have a common interest, is that the sport integrity have to be safe, to keep sport environment safe and secure for the children, as the FIFA said, for the good of the game. This is our experience. I just want to share with you the quote of Mr. Lemke, who said that the necessary establishment of a strict legal framework in partnership with the world of sport at all levels must be accompanied by creation of educational and professional opportunities for young athletes as part of a prevention work. Why? Because in our point of view, if you want to combat trafficking, if you want to be efficient on the ground in Africa, we need to give opportunity to make projects for the kids, for the academies, and give solution, because what the people need is a better life, a better training, better condition to have information. We are very, very concrete. That's why in Africa, actually, we, Food Solidaire, have launched a Food Solidaire passport, which will be is a booklet of information and advice in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and in French. And the YOPA program, which is Young Player Protection in Africa program, which aim to establish some information centers in African countries. And the YOPI program, the Young Player Protection in Europe, and with this program we want to establish some information office in Europe. And the Young Players Protection Summit we organize in London in 2016. Actually, Food Solidaire, we always seeking new partnership. To finish, I just want to say this issue is very important, and I would like again to thank all the hosts of this important conference, because at the beginning of Food Solidaire, there was young Africans, but today the problem is expanding in Europe, and it's very important today to tackle this issue more strongly, very strongly, because of the growing interest, the financial interest in football, in sport in general. I think the coming years will be very important for the protection and to fight against the trafficking and these criminal networks. Thank you for your attention.
I would like to say a big thank you to Jean-Claude for a fantastic presentation there. He gave us lots of brilliant insights into some of the challenges that young West African youth are facing in relation to their interaction with the world of football. I would like to now introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Monica Gorman, who is the Vice President of Global Compliance at New Balance. Now, Dr. Gorman leads corporate responsibility efforts for New Balance athletic shoes across Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and the Americas. And she was appointed in 2010 by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and U.S. Trade Representative to the Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Apparel and Textiles, and later Consumer Goods. She also serves on the Board of Directors of the Fair Labor Association, is a past director of the USDA Cotton Board, and a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations. In addition to all of that, Dr. Gorman has an MPhil in European Politics from the University of Oxford, a degree from Dartmouth College, and a PhD from the University of Oxford as well. So I'd like to introduce I'd like to give Dr. Gorman the microphone now. But before doing so, I'd just like to ask all of you to take the time as our presenters are talking to think of some possible questions for the Q&A session later on. So as you hear our presenters speaking, please do take a moment to think about some questions to share with us later on in the seminar. But I'll now pass you on to Dr. Gorman, who's going to present on the challenges facing the apparel industry in terms of criminal infiltration.
And Monica, before you begin, I'm just going to pause the recording. So give me 1 second. Sure. And okay, James, all you.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Gorman, thank you for a really, really insightful presentation on the way in which New Balance is actually going beyond rhetoric and actually trying to make a difference in terms of how people working in certain industries are able to have a living that's both financially beneficial, but also respects their dignity as human beings. And I think it's fantastic that New Balance are actually putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, unlike some other corporations that we won't mention. So we're now going to move on to our next speaker, who is, I'm pleased to say, a very, very, very well-respected person in her field with vast experience, and that's Professor Lisa Delpe Nerotti, who is a professor of sport at George Washington University and has been for the last 24 years. She has attended over 17 consecutive Olympic Games, 4 World Cups, and hundreds of other major sports events as a consultant, volunteer, and a researcher. She's worked with a number of sports organizations and professional teams to conduct economic, spectator, and market research studies, including the Olympic Games and the World Cup. And before we begin the next presentation, I'd just like to ask all of you who are probably thinking of questions now to ask at the end to start sending them in through the chat feature, which is visible on your screens at the bottom left. So if you'd now like to start maybe sending in some of your questions for the Q&A session that will be taking place later on. Now, I'd now like to hand you over to Professor Nerotti, who's now going to talk about some of the challenges in terms of major sports events. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my slide here. There I go. Could you help me get my PowerPoint up, please?
Yep. Are you the FIFA one? Yes. There we go. So if you go to the last tab, the one that says FIFA Prez _ Nerotti. There you go. Oh, wait. Nope. Few over.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect.
Well, it's great to be with everyone today. I'm excited to participate in the webinar. And having had the opportunity to travel to over 65 countries around the world studying sports, I've had the opportunity to witness both the positive and negatives of sport. I've seen, talking to people in Africa about not letting their young girls travel with teams because they come back, often pregnant. I mean, there's just so many issues that surround sports, but I know today we're talking about one specific issue and that I'd like to address now. My focus here is going to be more on policies because since 1985, I must say that I've seen improvements over the years that have come into place, and more organizations like Foot Solidaire that are making people aware of these challenges we have in sports. So I want to applaud Jean-Claude's efforts because we need more people like you to stand up and make people aware of these challenges. So we'll continue on. Oops, let's see here. There we go. Just in case everybody's not aware that FIFA does have a policy in place, Article 19, about protection of minors. And they, when I first started in this business, there was no regulations. I mean, people were, exploiting children right and left from all different parts of the world. And slowly there's become more regulations. So now they're not permitted to have an international transfer unless the player is over 18, but there's 3 exceptions to the rule, and this is where we get in trouble. There's always these exceptions, and people abuse the exceptions. So the player's parents move to the country in which the new club is located for reasons not linked to football. So it's supposed to be the parents are coming to work in a country not related to football, but it's, as we all know, it's abused. And oftentimes it's the teams, the clubs, that end up hiring these parents so that they can meet this exception of the rule. So, or they make up a fictitious job, again, so they can say that the family member is employed. The second leeway is that transfer takes place within the territory of the EU or European Economic Area. And this is when the player is between the age of 16 and 18. In this case, the new club must fulfill the following minimum obligations. So there's, there's lots of words in this document that FIFA shares with us. Implementing these things is more difficult than it is to read them. So they're supposed to have optimum living standards. They're supposed to have access to education, beyond just football education. They're supposed to have academic education. And, the challenge is it's easy to say that we'll offer all these things, but how many actually do? And then when you look, the English Premier League has a 20-page document unto itself just on this in terms of youth development rule. The EPL has standards. They regulate who can scout, when, and how. They have, the scouts have to go through a certification prior to be able to speak to a young talent. Now, again, it's all in writing. And are there abuses? Yes. But for the most part, none of these rules were in place, 10 years ago. So I want to make sure everybody understands that there is progress being made in this area. And I think we just need to keep pushing it and keep encouraging everyone to think about the good of sport. The third way to get around the rule is player lives no further than 50 kilometers from the national border. And again, I've heard people, they pay for moving expenses for families. So they just say, oh, they live close to us now. But I mean, how did they get there? It was usually the clubs have paid for their moving expenses and found a house for them, et cetera. So there's always ways to get around the rules, which we need to just keep watch of. And then FIFA recently banned third-party ownership. Third-party ownership, it basically means that somebody outside of football can come in and take equity in an athlete. So a club owns an athlete or has their rights, and an outside person can come and say, hey, we'll give you, $10 million and we'll take 50% of his future earnings. And that's good for the club because they may need that $10 million right there to keep their team going and to pay that athlete what he needs so he won't go someplace else, and to also pay for other players. But FIFA has now banned this because these third-party ownerships has caused problems. You can imagine these investors want money back. They want to recoup their money that they invested, so they'll do anything to get that back, and including things that are not good for the athlete. So Spain, Portugal, and Brazil are now strongly fighting this ban. because, especially Spain and Portugal, because that's the way they have been able to fund their programs. And then finally, in terms of mega event and human trafficking, it's a little off the topic of, athlete trafficking, but it falls into the realm of things that overall, with the increase of tourists for mega events, there's a fear that there's an enhanced opportunity for potential trafficking to that area. And there were some reports about in Sochi, some women from the United States were even being lured over there for the hopes of a job. They haven't been able to find real hardcore evidence on this, but I know in Brazil they're worried about it because sex tourism is a major issue already without having the Olympic Games there. There are, what I think is good, is any host country automatically starts increasing their surveillance of operations. And so there seems to be that there's more stings happening, and they're eliminating some of these trafficking problems before the mega event happens. There's also many awareness and educational campaigns against human trafficking before the mega events. And it's not just, sex trafficking, but it's, the red card campaign for the 2010 World Cup, where they hand out a red card around the stadiums and the live event areas to increase awareness of the spectators about this situation. In the United States, mega events such as Super Bowl are claimed to be the largest sex trafficking events in the United States. And finally, the International Olympic Committee, under their Agenda 2020, has principles of good governance, and they have a specific rule number 6 that discusses athlete involvement, participation, and care, stating that anybody involved with the Olympic movement should take measures to prohibit exploitation of young athletes. Athletes should be protected from unscrupulous recruiters and agents, and cooperation with government of the countries concerned should be developed. These are all nice words that are on paper. Implementation, again, is underway and working. I know the IOC is working more closely with national Olympic committees and international federations to make them understand what this means and how they can help prohibit any exploitation. So with that, I'd like to close, and I think we're opening it up for questions. Am I still on?
You are, but I think, James, do you have anything you'd like to say? James on mute. He's on mute. There we go.
Oh, if I could just say one more thing about, recently I was in Brazil and had the opportunity to meet with some people from UNICEF, and they shared really strong stories about what's happening in the Brazilian academies down there, the youth academies, where young boys are being taken from their home, moved to these academies, not given education. Oftentimes they are sexually exploited, and there's a tough situations there. But UNICEF is trying to come in and make some changes. In the Dominican Republic, it happens with baseball. They have these spoons that go to homes. So, it's happening around the world, not just, in Africa. Okay, so I'll turn it back over.
Okay. Put it. Okay, done.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Narotti, for a really interesting presentation there. The first half, when you were discussing exploitation in terms of the movement of young minors within the football industry was very, very insightful. I think many of us will be able to see the connection between what you were saying and the case that Jean-Claude presented at the start of the seminar. And then you went on to then talk about the issue of sexual exploitation in terms of its relation to sporting mega events, which was again very, very interesting and insightful. And I think just as we're starting to kind of think about the Q&A session, it's very interesting to see how we've heard from, an NGO, a charitable organization, the private sector, and also hearing the side about policy as well. Now, very rarely do we get the chance to hear people from these three different sectors often come together and talk about issues facing exploitation within the sporting industry. So when you're thinking about your questions, maybe try to think about how we can maybe take advantage of the fact we've got these three very, very knowledgeable people from three different sectors all in one space, and maybe some of the questions we can maybe pose that could get to think about future collaborations across these sectors. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the Q&A session. Now, I'd like to begin by asking Jean-Claude a question, if I may. And Jean-Claude, I think many of us, when we first heard you talking about issue of football trafficking, were very captivated by some of the cases and the issues that you were talking about. But I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more about where are these boys coming from in your experience, and the ways in which they're being exploited. So just to clarify, could you maybe say a little bit more about where these boys are coming from, and are you seeing cases from particular countries or particular locations? And also in terms of exploitation within the football industry itself, are you seeing more cases of actual clubs trying to recruit young players for purposes of exploitation? So yes, I'd like to pass that on to Jean-Claude, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Esson. And I would like to congratulate my Monica Gorman and Lisa Delpi Narotti to their very, very interesting presentation. What I can say today about the young players trafficking is in Europe mainly because the European clubs mainly recruited in Africa and in Latin America, and you have two levels of recruitment. You have the top leagues like the English Premier League, the Spanish League, and you have the other leagues like the French League and Switzerland or other Romania, Hungary, Austria. They don't have very big budget like the English Premier League, so they have to recruit very cheap, the cheapest player they can find, and these players are mainly in Africa. And today we have, according to their country, for example, French-speaking countries, African French-speaking countries, mainly going to Belgium, to France, and Switzerland, and now because of these countries are very close to Africa, they are going to Italy and Spain, Portugal. So the Anglophone-speaking country, like South Africa, Ghana, Liberia, and other like Kenya, they are mainly going to Norway, to Denmark, to UK, and other in Germany. According to the history, you know that relationship between European countries, for example, France with African Francophone country, is according to their history. So we find mainly Francophone people in France, maybe Spain, Portugal, because these countries are very close of Africa, Switzerland and Belgium. For other people coming from Ghana, South Africa, Angola, you have their migration, sport migration to Norway, Denmark, and other eastern countries. So in Africa, you have this issue. The trafficking is more important in country of football, I can say, For example, all the African countries who have good results in international competition, like Ghana, like Cameroon, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria, they are the main providers of players to Europe. And the mechanism of the recruitment are very, very simple. They are asking money, and they are promising trials to big clubs in Europe. And then the family have to loan, to pay big sums of money to these people, these so-called agents, recruiters. I was very pleased of the presentation of Lisa, because of this FIFA regulation saying that you cannot recruit at international level the teenagers. But today we can see that in football organization, the football association of the FIFA Football Association, we don't have any monitoring of academies, any control. Recently, the FIFA banned the Barcelona team in Spain because of minors recruitment. But everybody was knowing that since many years, the Barcelona, they was recruiting people at 10 to 12 year olds. So in our point of view, this was, I can say, a political ban of Barcelona, because we have a lot of other big clubs in Europe recruiting young players at very, very low age. So what I can say to this, about the trafficking today, I talk about, for example, the next FIFA regulation on intermediaries. Since 2001, we had the FIFA licensed agent. So you have to apply at your FA, and there is a kind of exam to be agent. But at the 1st of April, the FIFA has suppressed the license for any intermediaries. So today, because they said it's just about 30% of professional transfer in Europe was done by the licensed agents. So they prefer to suppress the license for agents. But this measure is very dramatic in the African level, because how today the family can distinguish between an official agent and a non-official agent. Today it's very difficult to know who is a real agent, but you can imagine with the new regulation in Africa what it will be, because the lack of information will be, I can say, will bring the family to more and more difficult situation, and there will be an increased number of football intermediaries, of agents.
Could I just step in there a bit? Jean-Claude, can I just say something? That I'm reading the policy or the statements that FIFA has written about this new intermediary licensing, and although they don't get a license, they are supposed to, fill out this form, have this test of good character, and have a background check. Now, my question is, how in Africa are you going to get a background check? I mean, I can see how UK has it and other places. I'm just not sure how feasible that is in other countries.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I think that is a very bad regulation for Africa. Why? Because today you have the license, but there is a lot of bad practice today, because some people who are not, who don't know anything about recruitment, about transfer, they can buy the license at the football association. So today there are a lot of very bad practice, and some people who are not agents, they are in Africa is not, when we are talking, for example, about trafficking, about bad practice, about regulation. In Africa, for the people, the life is so difficult. The football career is so difficult. So when they have an opportunity to go to Europe, they see is the promised land for everybody. So when we are talking in Europe, in Occidental, I can say Occidental point of view, we are talking about trafficking. In Africa, is not trafficking. It's just an opportunity given to a young people to have a better life. So I think with the new regulation, maybe in Africa there will be not change, but I can say a negative evolution of the situation, because that will make there will be an increasing number of people involved in the recruitment. For example, it's very easy to fill there is a kind of application form you have to fill, as you said, just sign and give to the FA saying that you are a recruiter and you are dealing with a club for a transfer. It's very easy. Anybody can do that. So maybe tomorrow you will have a lot of people who see football like a kind of I can say, where anybody can gain money. So this regulation is, I can say, an open door to the bad practice in Europe. But we know that, for example, in France, the French government, the French laws will keep their regulation on agents. The regulation will stay the same. But I think in Africa is important today. I didn't hear anybody about this issue, about the next coming regulation. But it's important to have strong national laws, because we cannot just trust the sport regulation. As you talk about the FIFA regulation, about the FIFA regulation, nobody, the football bodies and the clubs, everybody know that nobody can. There is very bad practice, but everybody say that is football. So in Africa, it will. I think there is maybe the role of NGOs, big NGOs like the Global Initiative and others, pushing the African Confederation to try to talk and to cooperate with the government, because there is another issue today saying that the sports world is independent. They need their independence because of their specificity, the specificity of sport. But if you let the reality show that, the facts show that the sport movement cannot just be another world. They have to follow the laws of the countries. They have to cooperate with the government, and for the benefit of the athletes, for the benefit of sport. So I think in Africa we need today to have the government involved in sports policy. Maybe that is the good. That will be the good way to balance the new regulation problems. I don't know if I answer your question.
No, thank you, Jean-Claude. That was a very, very comprehensive response to both the question that I asked, and I think also to the question that Dr. Narotti asked as well. But I was wondering if I could perhaps ask you another kind of related question, actually, because you both touched upon an issue of the movement of minors in your presentations. And I was just wondering what your thoughts, and also Dr. Narotti's thoughts, were on the English Premier League's recent decision to try to encourage more homegrown players, to try and encourage more homegrown English players in the in the league, but asking clubs to try to shift the way in which they recruit players, rather than relying so much on foreign players, that they should try and introduce quotas so that clubs have to play a certain number of players who grew up in the UK. Now, there is a concern that this might lead to an increase in the movement of young players because provided someone has been at the club from the age of 15, they'll be eligible as a homegrown player. I was wondering if either of you have any thoughts on this regulation and how it might maybe impact on the movement of minors within the football industry.
You want to start, Jean-Claude?
Yes, sorry, Jean-Claude, if you could go first, followed by Lisa.
Lisa, you can start.
I would say that there is the tendency for some to now kind of panic, and these people who should not be in the business anyway, who are just trying to make money. I could see how they are maybe going to now say, hurry, hurry, let's get these guys up and do anything they can to get them into the country. But I do know that with all these new regulations, that it's going to be harder for them to do this. So I guess there would be the temptation to recruit these people earlier, but there's a lot more people looking at the transportation of young people to play sports in other countries. I think the spotlight's on, and it's going to be harder for people to get away with it. I also have heard, and I'd like to hear Jean-Claude's comments. I've also heard that the African football associations are trying to kind of minimize the number of people who go away, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for that response. Jean-Claude, do you have anything to add to that?
About the homegrown player, I think is we understood this since 2007. The UEFA was talking about this regulation to try to promote the national teams, mainly in Europe. But I think what happened and what is happening is that who is a homegrown player is the player who was trained in the club from 15 years old. But today you have this push a lot of people to recruit the players very young, at 10, 12. And the ban of FIFA against Barcelona show that this movement began very early, and at 2007, 2000, with the UEFA proposal. But today you have, and what we are seeing in Africa is very, very difficult. The life is difficult. When you travel in Africa, sometimes you can meet people, some family, they are ready to give, to sell their children to have a better life in Europe. So in football is the same today. The family let the children at 10, 12 years old going abroad with, if they are talented, is a lucky for the family, is a chance for the family and for the young player. So I think this regulation is a good, it starts by a good intention of the UEFA to promote. But we know that is very, very difficult today because the clubs, they are looking for the young talent, very, very young. If you watch in YouTube and in the YouTube on internet, you can see today the family, they post the video of very, very young players. Some European clubs have recruited, for example, a Japanese of 9-year-old last year was recruited by a Spanish club, big club. So what is important today, I think, is not the regulation. is anybody has to be aware of the children, to protect the children, to combat the trafficking inside football, and all people coming, all the criminal network trying to manipulate football. As today we have the problem of the money laundering, of the betting, and all this bad practice. But for the young players, it's not just regulation; it's what we are doing concretely on the field. And anybody has to be aware of his responsibility, I can say, because you cannot have a policeman behind any clubs, any scout, and any player. So anybody has to be aware of its responsibility, and mainly the footballing authorities, the clubs, and the people recruiting, because is important for the ethics of sport, the integrity of sport. That is not, you cannot regulate the ethic and the integrity to make everybody aware of that, because if not, the sport will be for the fun, it will be a disaster. To know that we are watching an unfair sport, a sport of bad practice, and a sport which who trafficked the children.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Claude, and thank you, Lisa, for that really interesting and insightful response to my question. And that leads me on to a further question. I think you've both touched upon the challenges of trying to combat the issue of trafficking within football itself and the movement of minors. Do you think that there needs to be greater kind of interaction between sporting institutions and state institutions and government bodies in order to try to address some of these issues? So, for example, the movement of a young person to play for a football club, does that constitute a violation of labour laws in some countries, for example? So, in other words, I'm asking, do you think we need to have a great interaction between sporting institutions and state institutions? And if so, how do you think we could foster that kind of dialogue and relationship? So, Lisa, I was wondering if you could maybe go first with a response to that question.
Well, I know looking at the FIFA regulations, I mean, the game changed in terms of these intermediaries and agents and transfers when the EU was formed because of the labor laws that were put into place. So government does have a major impact on sport regulations, as seen by what happened with the transfer mobility of players in Europe. And I think some of these need to be labeled as crimes and have some people who are caught trafficking young people for football need to actually, have greater penalties, I believe. And so maybe the risk would be greater than the reward.
Thank you, Lisa. And Jean-Claude, do you have a response to the question?
Yes. Can you just repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. In short, what I was trying to understand is, for example, the trafficking of youth within the football industry, for example, is obviously, as you mentioned, it's a serious problem, and it's one that's currently trying to be addressed within football itself. The question I'm trying to ask is, does there need to be greater interaction and dialogue with state institutions as well? So, for example, is the movement of young people something that sporting institutions should try to talk to government bodies about in terms of labour legislation and labour laws and things like that? So Jean-Claude, is that question clearer, or do you want me to repeat it again?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, your question was clear. I switched off my microphone. And I think this is a very important issue. But when I was working with on the report on the future of professional football in Europe with the European Parliament in 2007. This was a very big issue because the independence, the autonomy of the sports world was clearly a problem, because the politics was saying that football world has failed, sport had failed to try to eliminate some threat inside sport. We were talking about money laundering, like violence in the stadiums, like the betting, the illegal betting, and all the problem around sport. So the European politics, with the first report of the first report on sport in Europe said that it was very important to keep the sport safe and to protect the young player, and to keep, for example, the European model of sport with interrelation between the professional side and the amateur leagues, and keep a kind of solidarity between the top level and the amateur leagues. So they was talking about what model for sport in Europe and what objectives, what was the aim of the sport in Europe. And this problem was very important, because when we are talking about, for example, the bad practice in sport, who is responsible? Today, the sport bodies are not very sure that it's their responsibility to work with the NGOs like Food Solidaire, to work with the government on this issue, because they say is not the trafficking of young players are outside of the football association, outside of for example, the professional clubs is a kind of a gray zone of football. But what we notice is that we highlight this, is that the bad practice, the trafficking of young players, even if they are made outside of the football association, because the young players are not licensed, all these trafficking one day benefit to professional football, because when the young players are recruited without license, because 80% in Africa, 80% of academy are non-official academy, so they are not linked with the football association. But we know that in this gray zone, everybody recruited in this gray zone. The scout, the European scouts, the African clubs, the agents, the intermediary, and in this side we have a lot of trafficking, and the organized crime is very is present. So I think is a problem of responsibility at the end of the process. It's the responsibility of anybody to say, we, the football people, the sport people, we can combat the trafficking, not just with regulation, because we have very good regulation. The FIFA regulation, sometimes we can say, with the three, for example, with the three exception, is sometimes we said at last is a good regulation if anybody follow the rules, but anybody don't follow the rules. Everybody don't follow the rules. That is the problem, and you don't have any means of control, and you don't have any intention of control inside to try, for example, to combat the trafficking. So, in our point of view, we need cooperation. Maybe we need good cooperation between the government, the sport authorities, and the NGOs working on this field. For example, you have the good job of the UNICEF. They have good cooperation with some big clubs in Europe, but this is a good example of cooperation of best practice, where we can try to expand with the football bodies. So the importance of the cooperation is one of the big issue.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Claude. Seeing as you just mentioned corporations, and we're very lucky to have Dr. Gorman here with us. I was wondering, Dr. Gorman, could you maybe say a little bit in terms of the relationship between governments and policymakers and other associations in the context of the discussions that we've had so far?
Yes, absolutely. Way to educate the young African American players that are being promised something that may not be delivered. I'm going to take it more from even the United States. I mean, we have this whole issue with NCAA and some people saying that, playing NCAA is like slave labor. But to me, they signed up for it. They knew what they were getting into it, or they should have known that in exchange for a college scholarship, you have to work out a lot and play a lot. I mean, I don't know. I think that if there's a way to educate parents and athletes at a young age, but the problem is they're so desperate of situation that they may not want to listen. We all want to know. We all want to hear what we want to hear. So it's a difficult situation.
Okay, thank you for that response, Lisa. I was wondering if I could just quickly sneak in a related question, and that was one that came in from one of our participants who's listened to the seminar. And just then you mentioned the situation facing African American youth, and just very briefly what you mentioned there seems to be clear connections with what Jean-Claude mentioned earlier on in terms of the hopes, aspirations of these young West African boys and men who have aspirations and dreams of becoming professional athletes. And just then when you talk about African American youth, there seem to be some parallels between the two. So I wonder if you could say more about maybe issues of exploitation that might be taking place beyond the African context.
Well, as I mentioned, in Dominican Republic, they do the same thing in baseball. I mean, it's just all the way through Latin America, primarily Dominican Republic. And then, I think all these young kids, they grow up thinking that their only way out or their only way to, gain income is to be a professional athlete. And so they'll do anything to make that happen. And it may not even be the young kids, but it's also the parents who agree to it. So maybe we can work with companies like Coca-Cola and New Balance and everybody that's working in these other countries to try to do a public awareness campaign. I know UNICEF's trying to do more of a public awareness campaign, but maybe it just has to be a general awareness campaign. I don't have any great answers.
No, thank you, Lisa. I think at this point, we're trying to start thinking of ways to move forward. And until we have these kind of discussions and people put forward their ideas, we're never going to do that. We don't expect to have all the answers in this seminar today, but you're definitely giving us food for thought to maybe move into the right direction. So I think Monica would actually like to comment on the discussion as well. So, yeah, so Monica, if you can, your response there kind of touches on something that I think has kind of filtered through all the discussion so far, is that what we're all kind of talking about and discussing is how can we find ways to understand how one person is able to exploit another person, be that in terms of trafficking through football, be that through intermediaries, moving people through the apparel industry. I think we're all kind of touching on how do we understand that process, because it kind of cuts across everything that all three of the speakers have said so far. So, no, so thank you for that. Sorry, somebody want to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Jean-Claude, what role do you think that the African Football Association should play in this? Is there any way they could be more overseeing this process? Because right now what FIFA is doing is the license, they're pushing it back down to each FA, and that FA is supposed to, prove or certify that the person that's the intermediary is a good person and that they're not going to do anything bad. So can we trust the African FAs to regulate this?
Very good question, because, you know, with my experience with now 15 years on the field and meeting the officials, football officials in general, and African officials, I think it's very difficult when you see the state of the governance of football actually, and when you see the big sums of money, of millions of transfer of players, it's very difficult to imagine. Actually, with the state of the governance of football, it's very difficult to imagine a real action from the football body. Why? Because today, when you see the governance of football in Africa, the governance of clubs is very. There is a lack of competence, skills about management of sport, about who actually promotes sport in Africa. You have some businessmen, and when we talk about businessmen, is all these people trying to invest in football and get more money. That is what we are seeing in Africa. And today in Africa, the football for anybody, clubs like FA, African officials, football is just to make money. That is dramatic, but that is the reality today. Anybody involved in football try to say, how can I get a lot of money? How can I manage? So they are dealing with the fake agents who give the international certificate of transfer. Sometimes you have some people recruiting children in official clubs with false identity, with false age. You have all these bad practice are done by, I can say, 70% by African officials in FA. So today I cannot trust. What is important is if the government, the public authority can be involved in the process, because we are talking about youth. It's not just footballers, because when you say young players, young footballers, is not very concrete. When you say children in football, that is concrete, because the children is the human being. It's not just people playing, running behind a ball. They are children before being footballers, athletes. So it's important that the public authority must be involved in the process and monitoring the FA and controlling what's happening in academies, how they train the children, how they promote the children. You know that the young players are not good. So you have to take care. It's very important because it's children. And today, the problem is that when a young player fails in football, he failed in his life because he had any education. And today in Africa, the children playing in academies, they abandon school, their education, they abandon anything. They just focus on football. I want to make it. I want to be professional player like Samuel Eto'o, like Didier Drogba. So it's not tolerable today. If sport is like the life, is like our daily life. You can fail in your life, and then another day you succeed. But in football today, for the children, when they fail, their life their life can fail. Their education. So I think we need to have a kind of, but we have to respect the football regulation, to respect the governance of sport, to respect the official, because sport is another world, is a world of competition, is a world of is another world, I can say. So we have to respect the autonomy of sport, their independence. But in the other hand, the sport have to respect the laws. That's the problem today, and in Africa is worse. like ever, and I can say that because day by day, every day, I am working with African academies, with African officials, with the people working with the academies. I'm talking with the agents, with officials. On the ground is worse day by day. I remember when I was playing in Cameroon in 1994, I played for the youth team, Cameroon national youth team, and this problem was not so big as today. I can say I'm a good example of what sport can make for a children coming from a poor country, because I was in a very, very poor area of in Cameroon, in Yaoundé. But by football, I make my life. I didn't want the Champions League, I didn't want the World Cup, but by football, through football, I get a good life, and that's why I was very committed in food solidarity, because I say, if the football can help, if football helped me to do something of myself, maybe that can continue for the new generation. So today in Africa, the things are going worse, and anything is money, money, money. It's okay. You need business in sport, because you have sport business is a good, is another side of sport, is business, high level competition, professional football. But in sports, you also have education of children, care of children, health of children. For example, all this issue of gender equality, of non-violence, of peace, of development by sport. But in Africa today, anything is mixed. We don't know, there is no strategy, no policy. When we talk about the development of sport in Africa, one of the solutions to stop the migration of young players, to stop the trafficking, nobody wants to develop sport in Africa. They train young players to sell. I say, unfortunately, I have to use this word. They sell the youth, the children abroad, because they need money. So we have so-called academy. Anybody are involved. If they don't have a job, they work, and they just create an academy. If you don't have anything to do, you create an academy. If you don't have money, you don't have job, you create an academy. So there is a kind of no man's land, no regulation. The FA, for example, in Cameroon, you have, I don't say Cameroon, in Senegal, you have 13 million people in Senegal. In the football, you have about 800,000 people playing football, young players playing football. But you just have, at the FA, you just have about 10,000 licensed people. So in my point of view today, we need a real commitment of the government, of the public authority, supporting and maybe controlling, if necessary, the action of the football, the FA, particularly on the youth development. It's very important.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Claude, for that response. And I think we're coming to the end of the seminar now, but from hearing all of the presentations thus far, and also reading some of the comments coming through from our listeners and participants, one thing that seems to be coming through very clear, and perhaps it could be the subject of a following seminar, is that, Jean-Claude, you mentioned the lack of alternatives, for example. And I think what you're leaning towards, and what a lot of us discussed today, is that actually we're dealing with some very, very serious structural issues that transcend sports, that they're not sports-based necessarily, they don't emerge from sports itself. The root cause is something far deeper, it's more structural. And I think one thing that we hopefully we can have a possible seminar later about this is trying to understand some of the root cause and the structural issues that are leading to instances of exploitation within sports, and why it is that sports have become a vehicle through which people are able to engage in this kind of exploitative practices. Now, on that note, I'd like to perhaps ask Monica to begin by perhaps just wrapping up now and giving us her final comments in terms of the seminar, and maybe a message for our listeners, a final message in terms of what her final statement is to those who have been listening. So, Monica, if I could ask you to maybe just give us your closing statement. Monica, thank you for being part of this panel and one of our invited speakers, and for giving some really fascinating insights into the challenges facing organisations such as New Balance in terms of the apparel industry and exploitation that's taking place within it. I'd now like to ask Lisa and Professor Narotti if you'd please like to give us your final comments and closing thoughts.
I think we really need to just raise the awareness of young people that there's other alternatives besides football, and encourage them to focus on education as well as football, but then to help educate the football associations and put more pressure on them to regulate what's going on in the places where there's abuses. And I'm hoping that these, I know Jean-Claude is not, he thinks it's going to go worse with now FIFA not having official licensees. But I think the regulation, if it's put into place, could monitor more about what's happening, because it's putting the emphasis on the athletes to also submit contracts and things they've signed to the Football Association. But again, if we have a root problem with those in the Football Association, it's not going to help the situation. So I guess my final conclusion is just, I think more education all the way around for the athletes as well as the administrators working in football.
Okay, thank you, Professor Narotti, for your final comments. And Jean-Claude, if in a few words, could you just maybe give us your final comments as well? I know you've spoken at length already about your thoughts and the direction the industry is going, but if you could maybe give us your closing comments, just a few words for our listeners before we wrap up.
First of all, I think we have to, I listened Lisa, who was talking about education, about awareness, about putting pressure on FA. That is very important. I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic because when we understand what the people talking on the ground, we think there is a change. We can make a change if we have more initiatives. And I think we need to be optimistic because the youth is very important. We cannot give up. But this initiative, this conference is very important. When I began the Food Solidaire 15 years ago, there was a kind of desert. Nobody was talking about this issue. It's very important today to have people like Monica of New Balance, which is a very worldwide known brand, to be involved in these initiatives. It's very important to have the private sector involving and try to have to exchange and how everybody can work together, because we need to work together. And to finish my introduction, I would like to talk about a project. We have this project of information center in Africa, because we think the protection of minors, the protection of young players, and the fight against the trafficking is a permanent work. I think we cannot trust anybody. We cannot trust these criminal people. So it's a permanent education of the people. It's a permanent awareness, and we have to be very close of the people, the families, the young players, and the academies. That's why we have this project of information center. The first one is to be in Senegal. So we are looking for partnership, for sponsors or anybody who can help to do to make the first information center, because as I said, is a permanent work on the field to educate the family, to educate the young player, and to accompany them in their project. And if the footballing project is dead, I can say we can give them another opportunity succeed their life. So I'm very happy to be part of this online conference, and I thank the Babson College and the Global Initiative, and I thank yourself, Dr. Esson, for this good conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. And I'd like to actually take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers today, because I think you'll all agree they did a fantastic job and they gave us plenty of food for thought. And I think moving forward, I think one thing that's very, very clear from the discussions that took place today is that at some stage in the near future, it'd be great to have a discussion that really looks at some of the root causes and structural issues that are leading to exploitation within the sporting world. Now, before I go, I'd just like to pass you on to Christina, who's got a few final words to say to all of you. And I'd like to thank you all once again for coming and attending this seminar, this virtual seminar. So good night, good afternoon, and in some cases, probably good morning. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esson, and thank you to our extraordinary panelists today for such an innovative and thoughtful discussion. I have so much that I'm taking away from this, and I can't thank you enough for all your support and efforts in what is a very difficult area to address. And I want to thank our audience for sticking with us for 2 full hours, and we've gone over the second hour. But I just want to announce, as part of our series, our next upcoming webinar is If You Build It, They Will Come, Labor Exploitation in the Construction Industry, and this will take place on Wednesday, April 15th, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and then from 4 to 6 p.m. Central European Time. And we'd be thrilled to have your participation on that as we go into our next installment. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to following up with all of you after the conversation. Take care. Bye-bye.